Let me tell you something that most people in finance, in business, in wealth management will never tell you. The Holocaust destroyed everything. Homes, communities, synagogues, entire family trees wiped off the map in less than a decade. And yet, within 2 generations, many of the Jewish families who survived it came back wealthier, more connected, and more strategically positioned than they were before the war. Not all of them, but enough of them that you have to stop and ask the question that nobody in your MBA program ever asked. How? How do you lose everything? And I mean everything. Not your startup failing, not a bad quarter, not a partnership that dissolved. I mean everything, and come back stronger. The answer is not resilience. The answer is not hustle. The answer is not even intelligence, though that certainly helps. The answer is that certain families had internalized a set of laws about money so deeply that those laws survived when nothing else did. The Warburgs are one of the most documented examples of this phenomenon in modern financial history. A banking dynasty that began in the 1700s in Hamburg, Germany. They were devastated by the Holocaust. Family members fled to different continents. The bank was seized. The business infrastructure they had built over generations was systematically dismantled by the Nazi regime. And yet, decades later, the Warburg name was back in finance, in philanthropy, in global influence, not because of luck, not because of connections alone, though they had those too, because of laws, 5 specific laws about how money works, how capital moves, and how wealth is structured to survive catastrophe. And every single one of those laws comes directly from the Torah and the Talmud. I'm going to give you all 5 of them today, not as religious teaching, as business strategy, because that is what they are. That is what they have always been. Stay with me through all 5, because the 5th one is the one that ties everything together, and it is the one that almost nobody outside these traditions ever learns. Let me start by telling you something about the Warburg family that most people do not know. When Max Warburg was navigating the terms under which Jewish families could emigrate from Nazi Germany in the 1930s, specifically involved in the framework of the Havara Agreement, he was not operating on hope or emotion. He was operating on a principle found in the Talmud, in Tractate Bava Metzia, which states that when you cannot preserve everything, you preserve what generates future value. That is a direct business principle, not a spiritual one, a strategic one. He helped facilitate the transfer of specific assets, not all assets, but the ones that would seed the communities that were rebuilt afterward. That is law number 1. But I am getting ahead of myself. Right now, your money is exposed. Inflation, market crashes, economic collapse. Most people lose everything when it hits. Jewish billionaire families never do. For 3,000 years, they've used one Torah system to protect and multiply wealth through every crisis. That system is now in one book. Link in the description and first pinned comment. Let me give you all 5 in the order that matters most. The first law is what I call the law of embedded value. It comes from Leviticus chapter 25, the laws of the Jubilee year. The concept is this: the land does not permanently belong to any single transaction. Every 50 years, it returns to the original family. Now, you might read that as a spiritual concept about the earth belonging to God. Fine, believe that too. But as a business law, what it is actually telling you is this: do not price your assets based on what they are worth today. Price them, protect them, and structure them based on what they generate over time. The Torah is making a sharp distinction between the surface value of an asset and its embedded generational value. Most people in business only see the surface. The Torah is commanding you to see deeper. The Warburgs understood this distinction completely. When they built M.M. Warburg and Company, they were not building a bank that was worth whatever its current balance sheet said on any given day. They were building an institution whose real value was embedded in its relationships, its reputation, and its network of trust across European capitals built over generations. That is why, when the physical infrastructure was destroyed, the embedded value did not die with it. Paul Warburg, who had moved to the United States years before the war and literally helped design the architecture of the Federal Reserve System, carried that embedded value in his mind, in his relationships, and in his name. The physical bank was seized by force. The embedded value emigrated with the people who carried it. Let me ask you a direct question right now. What is the embedded value of your business at this moment? Not the revenue, not the assets sitting on your balance sheet. I mean the relationships, the reputation, the institutional knowledge that lives in your team, in your client base, in the trust that your market has built toward you over time. Most entrepreneurs cannot answer that question clearly, and because they cannot answer it, they build businesses that are brittle. They build businesses that are only worth something as long as everything is running smoothly and nothing goes wrong. The Torah law of Jubilee is telling you, thousands of years before modern business strategy existed as a discipline, to identify what in your business has embedded generational value and protect that above everything else. Because everything else can be rebuilt. The embedded value, once destroyed, is nearly impossible to reconstruct from scratch. Here is how you apply this concretely starting this week. Sit down and make 2 lists. On the left side, write down everything in your business that is transactional, the things that generate cash today but have no compounding value over time. On the right side, write down everything that compounds, client relationships that deepen over time, your reputation in a specific niche or industry, proprietary systems your team has built, intellectual property, the name you have built in your market, the network of people who trust your judgment. Whatever lands on the right side of that list is what you protect first, always, without exception. Every deal you've ever lost, every salary you didn't get, every contract that fell apart, happened because you didn't have this. For 3,000 years, Jewish billionaires have negotiated with 12 Talmud tactics that nobody taught you. I put every single one in one book, the Talmud Negotiation Bible. Link in the description and first pinned comment. Get it now. If you ever face a crisis, and you will because every business does eventually, you protect the right side before anything else. You preserve the embedded value. That is law number 1, and it is the foundation everything else is built on. The second law is the law of multiple channels, and this one is going to feel counterintuitive to anyone who has been told that focus is the only path to success. This law comes from the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 11, verse 2. King Solomon, who was not just a spiritual king, but arguably the most sophisticated businessman in the ancient world, managing international trade routes, massive construction projects, and diplomatic relationships across dozens of nations, writes this: "Give a portion to 7, or even to 8, for you know not what disaster may happen on earth." Read that again carefully. 7 to 8. This is not a spiritual metaphor about being generous. This is a diversification mandate written 3,000 years before modern portfolio theory was invented. Solomon is telling you explicitly, do not concentrate your capital in a single channel, because you do not know what disaster is coming. And Solomon knew about disasters firsthand. He oversaw the construction of the temple, the most ambitious building project of the ancient world. He managed alliances with foreign powers. He understood that concentration of any kind is the structural enemy of long-term survival. The Warburg family operated in multiple channels simultaneously and deliberately by design. Banking in Hamburg, finance in London, policy influence in Washington, academic and cultural work in New York and Hamburg. When one channel was closed by force, literally seized by a hostile government, the other channels were already established, already operational, already generating. This is not luck. This is not coincidence. This is architectural planning, based on a principle that goes back to Solomon. Most entrepreneurs do the exact opposite. They focus intensely on one thing. which I understand because focus does matter for growth in the early stages. But they never architect the second, third, or fourth channel while the first one is working. And when the crisis hits, which it always does, they have nothing to redirect to. They are standing in a field with one crop, and a drought has just arrived. Let me tell you something that most business coaches will never teach you, because it does not fit their simple narrative about focus. Diversification is not what you do with your investment portfolio after you have already made money. Diversification is what you do with the structural design of your business before the crisis arrives. There is a real difference between spreading yourself too thin, which does kill businesses, and deliberately building multiple channels that can each sustain themselves independently. The Talmud draws this line clearly in its discussion of wealth allocation, prescribing that a person maintain approximately 1/3 in land or real assets, 1/3 in active commerce, and 1/3 in liquid reserves. 3 channels, not 30. 3, each capable of generating independently, each carrying a different risk profile. That is the architecture. Simple, clear, and 3,000 years old. The practical application this week is this: identify your single point of failure right now. The one client, the one platform, the one product, the one revenue stream that if it disappeared tomorrow would take your entire income with it. That is what you build around immediately. You do not wait until it fails. You build the second channel while the first one is thriving, because that is the only time you have the resources and the energy to build it properly. The third law is the one that most people find the most counterintuitive, and it is the one I believe was most critical to the Warburg family's ability to rebuild so quickly after everything was taken. I call it the law of the named obligation, and it comes from the Talmud, specifically Tractate Ketubot, and it is woven into the entire framework of Jewish commercial law going back thousands of years. The principle is this: every obligation must be named, documented, and witnessed. Every single one. Now, in modern business terms, that might sound like basic advice. Use contracts? Sure, everyone knows that. But the depth of what the Talmud is actually prescribing goes far beyond a standard contract. The Talmud is saying that the act of naming an obligation explicitly, specifically, in writing, with witnesses, transforms it from a social agreement that depends on goodwill into a structured asset that exists independently of the relationship between any two people. A named obligation can be transferred. It can be used as collateral. It can survive the death of either party involved. It becomes an instrument, not merely a promise. That distinction is worth millions of dollars, and most people never understand it. Do you understand why so much wealth was preserved within Jewish communities, even through extended periods of persecution, expulsion, and forced relocation? Because the community had developed an extraordinarily sophisticated system for naming, documenting, and transferring obligations that functioned as portable capital. When a merchant had to flee a city suddenly, which happened repeatedly throughout Jewish history across Europe and the Middle East, he could transfer his named obligations to another party within the community. Someone owed him money. That receivable could be formally assigned to a trusted creditor. He owed someone. That could be restructured through a named intermediary with full legal standing. The documentation infrastructure converted social trust into portable, transferable, survivable capital instruments. The Warburgs operated squarely within this tradition. Their banking relationships were not handshake agreements that depended on everyone remaining in the same city. They were named, structured, documented obligations that functioned as instruments existing independently of any individual person. Let me ask you this honestly. How many of your most important business relationships exist only in your head or in a thread of emails? How many of your deals, your agreements, your understandings with partners, with anchor clients, with key suppliers, are essentially verbal arrangements held together by goodwill and personal trust? If the answer is more than 0, you are violating the third law, and you are carrying risk you do not even know exists yet. The practical application is straightforward. Every significant agreement in your business, and I mean every one including the ones that feel too informal to document, gets named, structured, and converted into an instrument. Not because you distrust people, because naming the obligation is what makes it real, portable, and survivable beyond the specific moment and relationship in which it was created. The fourth law is the law of the designated teacher, and this is where the family dynasty dimension of the Warburg story becomes absolutely critical to understand. In Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 6 and 7, the commandment is explicit and precise. These words shall be on your heart, and you shall teach them diligently to your children. Now, in a business context, I am not talking about religious education. I am talking about deliberate, structured, systematic transmission of the operating knowledge that generates wealth from one generation to the next. Most wealthy families fail to maintain their wealth across generations for one reason that nobody talks about directly. They transfer money, but not the laws that generated the money. They leave their children and their successors assets. They do not leave them the operating system that built those assets. The next generation receives capital without the philosophy, and capital without philosophy is just a countdown to zero. The Warburgs did the opposite in every documented account of how the family operated. Young men in the family were brought into the business early and substantively, not as figureheads collecting future dividends, not as honorary board members, to learn, to sit in actual negotiations, to understand the philosophy of how capital was deployed, how relationships were structured, how obligations were named and managed. Felix Warburg, Paul Warburg, A.B. Warburg, Max Warburg, each of them developed in entirely different domains: banking, policy, art history, finance, but they were all educated in the same underlying operating philosophy. The money was the outcome. The philosophy was what the family transmitted deliberately across generations. And when the money was taken, physically seized by force, the philosophy remained fully operational in each of them, on different continents, in different industries. Within a generation, each of them was actively rebuilding in their respective domain because they all carried the same operating system in their minds. This is not motivational nonsense. This is a 3,000-year-old law that works and has been proven to work under conditions of maximum stress. Ask yourself right now, if you disappeared from your business tomorrow, what would survive? If the answer is not much, you have not yet built an institution. You have built a job that depends entirely on you showing up. The fourth law says, whatever knowledge, whatever philosophy, whatever operational framework made you successful must be explicitly taught to the people who will carry it forward. Your children, if you want to build a dynasty. Your partners, your key people. The transmission must be deliberate, not accidental. You do not transmit by example alone. You transmit by explicit instruction repeated over time. That is what diligently means in the original Hebrew text. With intention, with structure, and without stopping. The fifth law is the one that ties all four previous laws together, and the one that most people outside these traditions never encounter. I call it the law of the sacred remainder, and it comes from the agricultural laws in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 9, and chapter 23, verse 22. The Torah commands that when you harvest your field, you do not harvest all of it. You leave the corners. You leave what falls during the harvest. You leave a designated portion for those who have nothing. Now I know exactly what you are thinking right now. You are thinking, this is the charity section. This is where the Rabbi pivots to telling you to give money away. And yes, in the full spiritual tradition, that is part of what the text is doing. But I am not addressing you as a spiritual leader right now. I am addressing you as a businessman with 3 decades of experience watching wealth built and wealth destroyed, and as a businessman Let me show you what this law is actually engineering at the structural level. The Talmud, in its extensive discussion of these agricultural laws, makes one point absolutely clear. The person who leaves the corners of the field is not performing an act of generosity disconnected from their own interests. They are maintaining the social and economic infrastructure that makes continued commerce possible in their community. A community with extreme wealth concentration at the very top and total destitution across the base does not remain stable long enough for anyone to benefit from their wealth. It collapses. Revolutions happen. Markets seize up. The wealthy get destroyed along with everyone else when the ecosystem fails. The law of the sacred remainder is not soft. It is not idealistic. It is structural engineering applied to the economic ecosystem in which your wealth must continue to operate. Paul Warburg understood this at a level that very few people in American financial history have matched. He used his influence and his capital not merely for personal accumulation, but to build institutional infrastructure, specifically the Federal Reserve System, that made the entire American financial ecosystem more stable and more durable. He was leaving corners in his field deliberately and strategically, not because he was naive about power, because he was sophisticated enough to understand that a stable system protects wealth better than a volatile one does over any meaningful time horizon. Let me ask you the hardest question in this entire video. What percentage of your current success is dependent on an ecosystem that you are extracting from but not investing in? Your clients come from somewhere. Your best talent comes from somewhere. Your market exists because of an infrastructure that someone built before you arrived and someone maintains while you operate inside it. If that ecosystem degrades over time because everyone is extracting and nobody is contributing, your business degrades with it on a timeline you cannot control. The law of the sacred remainder is the instruction to invest in the ecosystem deliberately and structurally, not occasionally when you feel generous, not as a marketing play, not as PR that gets announced at industry galas, as a matter of law, as a structural element of how you deploy capital every single year. Now let me bring this back to exactly where we started. The Warburgs lost everything that could be physically taken from them. Everything. And yet they kept the 5 things that could not be seized by any government or destroyed by any war. They kept the embedded value that lives in relationships, reputation, and knowledge rather than in physical assets. They kept the multiple channels they had deliberately built across different industries and different continents. They kept the named obligations that functioned as portable instruments, independent of geography. They kept the operating philosophy that had been diligently transmitted to each member of the family across generations. And they kept the habit of investing in the ecosystems that would eventually support their rebuilding. 5 laws. Every single one of them in the text that has been guiding Jewish business practice and Jewish survival for 3,000 years. This is not coincidence. This is not mystical advantage. This is architecture. It is the oldest, most rigorously stress-tested business architecture in human history, tested against the most extreme conditions any family or community has ever faced and proven repeatedly to work. Here is what I want you to do this week. Not next month. Not when your schedule clears up. This week. Take a piece of paper and run yourself through all 5 laws as an audit. First, what is my embedded value right now? And am I actively protecting it above my transactional assets? Second, do I have multiple independent channels, or is my entire income flowing through a single point of failure? Third, are my key obligations named, documented, and structured as instruments that can survive beyond any individual relationship? Fourth, am I deliberately transmitting the operating system of my success to the people who will carry this forward after me, or is everything living only in my head? Fifth, am I investing in the ecosystem that generates my wealth, or am I only extracting from it and hoping it holds? Answer those 5 questions with complete honesty. The gaps you identify are not failures. They are your construction list. They are exactly what you build next, in order, starting this week. The Torah is not just a holy book. It is the oldest, most tested business manual in human history. And the Warburgs did not survive the Holocaust and return to prominence because they were lucky or because they had the right connections at the right time. They survived it and came back stronger because they were operating according to laws that were specifically designed to survive exactly that magnitude of catastrophe. Now you have those 5 laws. What you build with them is entirely your responsibility. If this is the kind of content you have been looking for, real principles drawn from real history with real application to your business today, not hustle culture platitudes recycled from a podcast, then subscribe to this channel right now because we are just getting started. Every week, I go deeper into the intersection of Torah law and modern business strategy, and what we cover here you will not find in any business school curriculum anywhere in the world. The people who built the financial architecture of the modern world did not learn it at Wharton or Harvard. They learned it from texts that are 3,000 years old, in communities that had been applying those texts to commerce, to capital, and to survival longer than any other tradition on earth. Subscribe, and I will keep bringing those texts to you in the language of business, which is the language they were always written to be understood in.